We were about 3 weeks into the pandemic when Jane and I had a meeting at our house with Brian Ratcliffe, who's the operations manager down at the food bank. He's been with us since 1992, really knows the stuff, is really good, especially at doing the inventory at the food bank, but also in helping other agencies. We were trying to solve something of a conundrum. How are we going to help other agencies? And also, what could we do about the homeless populations? We had been reading in the paper, had been speaking to the media, and they had talked about how many of the agencies had to either close down or limit their operations or move a number of the people to hotels that had been provided during those early days of the pandemic. The problem of that, of course, was they lost their kitchen facilities and other abilities to be able to help the people that they were seeking to assist. So we were trying to figure out what to do. Nobody had approached us yet about seeing if we could help them. But just as we were talking, it was a Saturday morning, the telephone rang, and I answered it, and it was a woman named Laurie De Silva. Now, she was the CEO of RBC Place in London, the huge convention centre. And she said, Glenn, I was talking with Michelle Baldwin from Pillar Nonprofit, saying to her that we would like to try to find a way to help people in London, but we weren't quite sure how to go about it. We've got an industrial kitchen. We've got a couple of really high qualified chefs. They too would like to find a way to help, but we don't know quite what to do. And Michelle suggested I call you. So we got into a talk about it, and Jane and Brian were listening away as we discussed it. But we talked about the opportunity if the food bank provided the funding, and RBC Place, with its industrial kitchen, could provide homeless lunch meals to be delivered out to the people that are homeless who couldn't get into facilities. And since the weather was warmer, we're actually out in the community in different places. Would that work? So she said, we're right there. Whatever the community requires. She said that they had to close down, really, as a convention center, because who was having conventions at the beginning of COVID? So she said they stood ready and willing to assist. So I said I would drop in to see her in the next week, which I did. Now, Laurie has just retired from RBC Place, but she was really right on this when I came in for the visit the next week. I met the two chefs that were there, Chris and David, and realized that they were keen too on trying to find a way to assist. So we talked numbers, and we talked about how could we get that food out to various people. We weren't sure, but we did talk to a couple of groups that said, look, we actually work with homeless folks and we deliver to them. We heard that you're thinking of doing something like this. We would like to be a part of that. One of those groups was called 519 Pursuit. And I met a woman named Amber, who was the volunteer director of it at the time. She and another girl named Alison DeBlair had been friends for years and had put together this group, 519 Pursuit, totally volunteer, sometimes made up of people who were homeless that were going out to visit other homeless people to try to help. So we made the arrangement that they would actually take the meals to people that were out there. Now, let's just be clear. We had no idea what we were doing. This was a whole new concept. It was a whole new paradigm of how to get food out to homeless people, especially those that were kind of out by themselves and not able to get much in the way of services because of COVID. Anyway, so we talked about it. We said we would do it, so we made a start. So I went in on the one day, I forget which day of the week it was, but the chefs had prepared these lunches, which were just top-notch lunches. Like these guys, it was the chef and the sous chef, and they really knew what they were doing. And so they put together these lunches, and then we went down to the underground truck bay area where 519 Pursuit came in, and they would take those and then go out. So right at that time, the media had heard of that and contacted me and said, we'd like to come down and see what you guys are doing. So they did. And it was awesome. So while Jane was back at the food bank trying to get that stuff going, I was over here at RBC Place trying to see if we could make a go of this, what would happen. I did not expect the full professionalism and the ability to adapt that the RBC Place chefs showed. They were pretty amazing. And I might as well admit that in the last 3 years, we have become good friends as a result of those initial days where we were all thrown into the deep end of the pool and trying to figure it out. But as the media stories went out about this, the media was looking for good news stories, something that they could latch onto rather than just the kind of the fear and insecurity that we were facing as a community. They went out and talked to 519 Pursuit, came and filmed them as they came in and got the food and went out. They interviewed me, the chefs, and others, and Laurie De Silva there, and away they went. And the story went out, and it was fascinating what happened next. I got a call from Cargill. Now, Cargill, of course, as you know, is the big manufacturer. They had phoned and said, look, we want to make a donation to this, a significant donation. It was tens of thousands of dollars towards this feeding thing that you're doing. Is there any way that we can help? So they came on as a partner right at the outset, which really helped to give us confidence as to what was going on. But then when it came to the delivery of food, how are we going to do it? London Cares, which is at that point is in partnership with the city, they had volunteers and vehicles, but they didn't know quite where they were going to get the food and other things. So they came into the lower ramp area at RBC Place and got some for the people they went out to see. And then there was 2 or 3 other groups that came in. And because they were kind of in their own downtime because of COVID, they came in with their vehicles and then took the food out to the various people. But then agencies began to call me. A lot of agencies. A lot of them had no ability to use their kitchen services or anything like that because groups like, Big Brothers or Big Sisters, groups like Queer Events and others, they just couldn't get into their regular headquarters and do it because of the distance restrictions required by COVID. So they said, is there any way we could get some of that food? Well, now we had decisions to make. So I had talked to the board. We had a kind of online board meeting, and I told them about the opportunity. And I said that one of our board members said, how many meals do you think it'll be required? I told them that I didn't know, but it could be up to 300 or 400 meals a day. The chefs could produce that. That was no problem. We had people that could get it out there, but were we willing to front the costs for that? You need to remember that this is near the beginning of the pandemic and the public was really, really generous. And then when Cargill came on side, I mean, it was pretty great, but other groups started coming forward as well. I'd mentioned in a previous video about one of the developers, Navito Frija from Southside. He came in with $50,000 that would go towards it. So while the city was trying to organize some kind of homeless response, we informed them, look, we've got your back when it comes to food. We'll pay whatever is necessary to make it happen. The public was giving this money to us, and this was the way we felt it could be spent properly. We also went to the media to let the public know that this is what we were putting some of their money towards. It was an amazing time. I would say it was one of the most positive times that came out of the pandemic. There was a cyclist group in London, people that drove bicycles, and because the weather was really good, they said, we would like to take that food out to various agencies. So I remember the first day I met with them, they even had their own mayor, and they all came in one day, and she said, look, we're ready to go. Where do you want us to take them to? So we gave them the addresses. They loaded their bikes up and their backpacks and their carriers and everything with this food, and they headed out to those areas. And they stayed with us for months and months and months till the weather went bad. I mean, they were really amazing. And it was just this gung-ho spirit. Average people, younger ones, older ones. At the same time, 519 Pursuit was coming in, and they were taking that food out. So we were getting out to a lot of agencies at that time. That was important. And then YOU, Youth Opportunities Unlimited, they said, look, we also have a kitchen, and with some people that are there, we could assist you with any overflow or anything like that. So they too came on side. So we also paid for those lunches that came out of YOU. All that I can tell you from those initial maybe 2 or 3 weeks when it first got started, there was so much media, there was so much positivity. There was so much space there at RBC Place that we could kind of cobble all of these things together. And there was so much of a willingness on behalf of the board of the food bank to look at that public generosity and say, let's pour some of it towards this homeless lunch effort, or else those homeless folks will have nowhere to go. The homeless agencies were deeply grateful that had happened. I will really say it really boosted 519 Pursuit up to a level where people really saw the beauty of these people who really knew what they were doing. The people they visited out there by the river or other places, they called them their friends. And that was the way that they approached it. They were in relationships with these people and they would bring food out to them. And that's the way that it went. Now, I will say that I was just down there this morning. 519 was down at RBC Place to pick up 100 lunches that were going out today to homeless folks. So we're talking 3 years later, and almost 4 years later, and they are still at it. They're still doing all of this now. RBC is up to full power again. They got all these conventions and business meetings, other things going on, but they found room in their busy production line for keep making room for the homeless lunch program. So they continue it on, even though they got the big conferences going on. And then they also approached us to say, we could also do some more in the summer. So they've upped the ante each day between Canada Day and Labor Day to be able to help. These are the kind of people we're talking about. These are people who are willing to really step up, go the second mile to do the things that are necessary. I think that we now know what the pandemic did to the homeless situation. It just seemed to mushroom from the beginning of the pandemic, and it now has remained for us as a community, and we're really struggling with knowing how to provide for it. But when it first came out in the pandemic that these homeless people had no place really to go, I think the way that all came together in such great collaboration, starting with people like Michelle Baldwin at Pillar and Laurie De Silva at RBC Place, really made a go of it and made it work. And they had contacted us because they knew we had the resources to provide the food. They were trying to figure out how to put all that together, and it turned out they were the ones that could do it. It's an amazing story, and it's a story that continues. So yes, in those early days of the pandemic, we didn't even know how close we could come to one another, what kind of masks we're supposed to be wearing. And yet here we were on the loading dock at RBC Place watching all of these bicycle people, sometimes 15, 20 at a time, come and take these things, and then off they would go, and we would wave to them, and away they would go, and then we would see them again the next day. And then in came the various drivers, London Cares, other groups that were coming in to get the food. So yes, it was a very hard time and a very confusing time, but in the middle of all of that confusion, this plan came out that involves some pretty significant players having to go above and beyond in order to do it. I love it. I love how it came together and the whole spirit of it. And it was the food bank that funded it all, but it was them that was actually making the food or delivering it. But at the end of the day, they're still doing it today. That part of the pandemic is all over. We're still dealing with the consequences of it. But it was the birth of a new kind of movement of how to get food out to the homeless people. It wasn't something that so much depended on tax dollars, but on donations that had come to the food bank from all these different sources to make it work. That is one of the highest points of pride, I think, that I feel that happened in that time. I was the person that had to kind of put it together. But it's easy to put things together with people who say, let's get it going. And that's exactly what they did. So as Jane was down there doing that down at the food bank with all the staff, I was trying to work out with other community partners. But what it meant was the food bank was beginning to expand out more into the community. This wasn't about people just coming to the food bank. This was now about the food bank taking its resources and getting it out to a community that was all separated from one another out of requirement. They couldn't all come in together. They weren't really allowed to gather. They were being warned about getting out there in public. It was really a difficult and a confusing time. We were able to, in the middle of all of that, cobble together all of these people and find a means of how to go about it. That's London for you. That was London coming together. That wasn't an architecture or a structure that was put together by anybody in leadership in the city. It was a bunch of collaborators coming together, putting their heads together and their hearts together. And this is what they came up with. And the fact that it's still going, and then I was down there even this morning, and that it's still going, there's a special kind of baptism that happened there for us as citizens, that we were born in that moment as a collaborative and a productive group that could take care of the people that were the most vulnerable among us, and it has endured and it has lasted. So the beauty of London isn't just the fact that it responded to that. It's the fact that it continues to respond, and these players continue to play their role. That's not a negative aspect of the pandemic. that's a positive thing. It was absolutely fantastic, and it remains so. And I'm so proud of that whole plan and how it went together. And I'm thankful that it continues.